At different periods in my life, I have felt to a certain extent kind of lost in my career, lost in my personal life, just not really sure where I was or where I was going. I found myself with maybe a lot of options in front of me, so I wasn't sure which option was the best choice, which route I should be taking. And then sometimes it was just a matter of having no idea what was coming next. And so I've adopted a kind of process for working through that period of time, really trying to understand a little bit better what are the options before me and how do those choices impact my future, and what in my past do I want to kind of learn from so that I can take those choices in a really positive direction. The earliest kind of memories of this sort of feeling of being lost and goes back to when I was in college, and it was there's always these periods of time between semesters. So from the end of the fall semester to the beginning of the spring semester, and then sometimes if I was taking summer school courses, there would be less of a pause here, but then of course the summer, if I wasn't taking any courses, would always be a period of just, not sure what's going on, like kind of an existential crisis, trying to understand what it is that I want to do next and where I'm going, even though a lot of the times I already knew I was going to be taking classes and I already knew what I was going to be doing in the next semester. More recently, I had an experience back in 2019, right before we had this whole pandemic related to COVID. I had an experience where I got to travel to Kampala, Uganda, and it was a really, really cool opportunity because I was participating in an event called Power the Next, which is all about empowering the next generation of entrepreneurs in Uganda. And they the organizers asked me to present some of my research about universal design and about technology and some of the work I was doing in entrepreneurship and innovation. And it was such an honor and such a privilege for me to get to do that, because I was working in a new cultural context. I was working with a new group of people, and it was really kind of exciting for me to feel that extension of my work into a new area. And so I was sitting at the beautiful banquet tables. There was probably 100 people in the room, and it was a moment of kind of, excitement. It was a moment of kind of anticipation. And I was one of the keynote speakers, so a couple of the speaker before me had come up. And he was a really, I don't know how to say this, but he was really cool. He was just dressed, and his bearing and his demeanor was just really, really cool. Like, he carried himself with this kind of feeling like, oh wow, this person really has some credibility and some integrity, and really has some interesting things to say. So he got up, and every word out of his mouth was poetry. And I'm sitting there just gobsmacked, and everybody in the audience is just hanging on every word. And he's talking about all these really important issues related to Uganda and the African diaspora and the culture in Uganda. And people are starting to cry. They're literally openly weeping. And every couple of sentences, their spontaneous applause breaks out. And I'm sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, I have to go on next after this person. And I was just kind of freaking out a little bit. So I nudged the person next to me, and I'm like, who is this person? And it turns out he's one of the most famous hip hop artists in Uganda. So here I am, an academic living in Norway from the US, in Uganda, about to give a presentation about universal design, and I have to follow up one of the most famous hip hop artists in the country. And I'm just thinking to myself, how am I going to make the pivot from what he is talking about, the emotional tenor in the room, to the stuff that I'm working on, which for me felt very, it just felt like a huge stretch. And so I'm starting to think of like tactics. How can I go about this, kind of breaking the ice? And, here's this person up in the front of the room trying to tell us about this academic issue. And turns out there was someone else that was going to be presenting after him. So he was actually the hype person for the actual keynote presenter. So the actual keynote presenter gets up there, and this is the CEO of the event. So this is the person who's responsible for this whole thing being organized. And he starts talking about his experience as a refugee, living in the UK at a very, very young age, and some of the abuses he experienced, some of the prejudices and the racism that he experienced living his young life. And again, the whole audience is visibly crying and erupting in spontaneous applause, and I'm just sitting there shaking in my boots thinking, how am I going to come up after this person and try to talk about these issues? Now, there's kind of a happy ending to the story in that the master of ceremonies kind of mixed up the program a little bit, and he put up a panel presentation, which I was on right after the CEO's presentation. So it was nice for me because I got like a soft entrance to the whole discussion, and it was me up there with several other entrepreneurs from Uganda, and we were talking about entrepreneurship in Uganda and how we can empower the next generation to become entrepreneurs. So they kind of gave me the nudge, can you just do a short presentation after this panel? I said, sure. Did my presentation, was ready to write off the whole experience. Just like, this was amazing. This was an awesome opportunity for me, but I don't know how much value I'm creating for the audience, because again, it was such a stretch going from the kind of the visceral experiences of the CEO, going from this absolutely enrapturing, enthralling words spoken by the hip-hop artist. And so then I'm making my way out of the room, kind of packing up my belongings, and some people start to come up to me and say how important it is for Uganda to hear about the work that's going on internationally and to learn from and to become empowered by this new knowledge. And that just filled me with love and happiness and joy, because I was, like I said, I was ready to just go back to my hotel room and sleep and then get on the plane the next day. It took me weeks afterward of kind of quiet reflection and meditation on the issue to realize that I was at a new juncture in my career, a new turning point in my career, and I could continue doing what I had been doing, which was more or less just scrambling for every piece of grant funding, every piece of every research article that I could possibly publish, and I was just putting out a prolific amount of work, but it wasn't concentrated. There wasn't a strategic approach to it. So it gave me a chance to reflect on that. And it was a few weeks later that I sat on a train. My partner and I were going to her family and to visit her family in Austria. And I was sitting on a train, and I was going through my phone, and I'm looking at the folders in my Dropbox. And I'm looking at all the projects that I've been working on, and I look at all the papers that I've been working on, and I realized that this is not what I want to do. This is not my future. This is my past. And I took that moment to just take all of those folders and put them in an archive folder. This is now something that's behind me, and I need to set a new agenda, a new strategy ahead. That story is just meant to give an example of the need for self-reflection. In research, we call it reflexivity, the ability to reflect on what you've done. And I think reflection is such an important part of how we approach our lives, our work, and understanding where we're going and where we've been. So if you're in a situation like I was earlier in my career, where I'm kind of going every direction but not really any direction, or I'm just not sure what direction to take, pause, put the brakes on, take a step back, and really reflect on your journey. Reflect on where you came from, where you're going, what kind of elements are present in your life, and don't be afraid to say no to the past and yes to the future.